blast from the past.
Please listen carefully.
CoCo.
Welcome to the CoCo Crew Podcast. A delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information. Featuring the Tandy Color Computer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
CoCo.
All right, pop the top. We're ready to get started. Welcome to CoCo Crew episode 36, the beginning of our fourth year.
Yeah.
Hooray! Have you got your CoCo 3 yet?
I do.
We've got a little bit shorthanded this month, but we'll see if anybody else drops in along the way. For now, I'm joined by, of course, Neil Blanchard. Hello, Neil.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CoCo New Year.
And, of course, Mr. Mike Rowan. How are you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to another year of CoCoing.
Awesome. Very good. Getting along. We've got CoCo Fest in the rearview mirror now. I think that was a good time had by all. We had probably record, at least local time, or in modern times, sort of record attendance. Certainly record attendance at Heron Point. 117 people joined the CoCo Fest. That was great.
Fantastic.
Moving and looking ahead, we've got Tandy Assembly coming up in 6 months in early November. And, of course, next CoCo Fest is planned to be another 11 months or so. I don't think we have a date yet, but I assume it'll be in April, just like it has been. So I don't know. What else is going on, guys? What are you working on? You got any projects in progress?
My main project now is...
Share about your new man cave?
Yeah. I'm moving my home office and my CoCo office to a new building, so I've got piles and piles of boxes and CoCos, and I've got to make sense of it over the next month or so.
Yeah, that's the only thing I'm not jealous about is having to figure out where everything is and where everything goes. But for those, it's a shame you guys can't see the pictures, but it just looks like about as cool as you could possibly get, a place to move for your office and stuff. So that should be really cool. How about you, Neil? You got anything going on? I think you said something about some audio digitizer cables.
Yes, yeah, I'm going to go into production with those. I'm going to do a run-up of digitizer cables for the CoCo. But cool. I'm going to go through the joystick port instead. A couple different ways to do it, but I want to access the DAC. So it's a little different design.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Sign me up.
Now, is there software already for that?
There is, yeah. That's the other reason why I want to go with this route. Most of the main software supports this method.
Cool. That's exciting. As for me, I'm still sliding a bit. Haven't quite worn off the funk, I guess, from CoCo Fest or whatever, but looking at a few things. I may do some non-CoCo stuff. Actually looking at maybe trying to get a game on some arcade hardware, like a Galactican PCB or something like that.
Cool.
And
That'd
besides that, I've been reading some compiler-related books, so we'll see what happens with the compiler stuff. Kind of had to put that on the back burner for a while unless some other things develop in the community, but I could only put it off so long, you know what I mean? So, what about eBay or other acquisitions? You guys got anything cool recently?
I picked up a few more Tandy VGA monitors.
Wow.
Tandy VGA monitors?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. Some different models. So I'm just, they have different dot pitches on them, so.
Yeah.
The VGM series.
I kind of had let my eBay stream kind of dwindle down towards CoCo Fest. Started to build it back up more towards this normal level. I did pick up a Avalon Hill boxed game shootout at the OK Galaxy. And so it's on cassette, and it comes with versions for just about everything.
That's cool.
It's like there's a version on it for the Atari 400, 800, version for the Apple II. There's a version for the PET, version for the Z80, TRS-80s, and a version for the CoCo, all on one cassette. Hopefully the cassette still works.
That's amazing.
I haven't had a chance to play with that yet. Yeah, there's some nice box games from Avalon Hill. Avalon Hill, back in that time, was a little more famous for doing tabletop, like war games, whatever. If you've ever played war games on a tabletop with like cardboard cutouts for representing different units in a military or whatever. And they were sort of contemporary with TSR, which was the company behind Dungeons and Dragons, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I was pretty familiar with Avalon Hill from that back in the day, but I've got a couple of games they've done as well. And that sort of seemed to be the way they rolled. They'd put a bunch of games on cassette for different computers.
They came multi-platform, like in one box, one package?
Yeah. One cassette.
That's cool.
You just have to fast forward to the right location on the cassette.
Yeah, it was a good way to do it.
Cool. It's supposed to be a graphical, like a little space shooter kind of thing. We'll see how it works.
Yeah, it'd be interesting
Probably
to see that.
Not the most exciting game ever would be my guess, but
still, it's cool.
It's cool
just from its history perspective.
Yeah.
I haven't really had any acquisitions from eBay. At CoCo Fest, I scored an old daisy wheel printer, and then I recently got a USB blaster so I can update my CoCo VGA.
Oh, cool.
That printer was a nice shape too, if I remember seeing it.
All right. Well, I think we've pretty much had our introductions. So why don't we go ahead and break, and we'll be back with some announcements.
I don't know if y'all all have ever heard of CoCo. CoCo? They're going to have to do some customizing. Anyway, well, I'm interested to see how that goes. And I actually like them.
Why buy just a video game from Atari or Intellivision? Invest in the TRS-80 color computer from Radio Shack. Unlike games, it has a real computer keyboard. With the TRS-80 color computer, the whole family can learn computing at home. Plays great games, too. Under $300, the TRS-80 color computer. Only from Radio Shack, a Tandy company.
All right, welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. Now we're going to have some announcements. You are listening to the CoCo Crew podcast. We are available on Twitter as at CoCo Crew podcast. That's at CoCoCrewPodcast. If you are prone to sending a tweet, feel free to send one our way or monitor us, and maybe we'll send one out every now and then ourselves. We are, of course, available with a page on Facebook, and there you need to search for the CoCo Crew podcast, 4 separate words. Check us out. We'll post relevant information from time to time, build some fellowship, share projects, all that kind of stuff. Come and find us. We are, of course, an audio podcast, so we are available on iTunes or through Google Play for downloads. Also available through Stitcher and TuneIn for streaming. And, of course, if you go to the www.cococrew.org, you'll find an RSS feed there for those that like it going the direct route. We are a member of the Throwback Network. The Throwback Network is a list of similar podcasts in theme related to the 80s in particular, many of which cover home computers and technology, arcades, that sort of thing. Some which cover other things like 80s holiday specials and other bits of mostly 80s culture. We are also listed on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. Also a list of podcasts, in this case all of them related to technology or vintage gaming. If you're looking for another podcast outlet or listening outlet, then do check out either the Throwback Network or the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. Audio files for the CoCo Crew podcast are, of course, hosted at Cyber Ears. If you have a need to host audio on the internet, we recommend that you check out Cyber Ears, where you will get your audio on your terms. If you'd like to reach us by email, we have some set up that will reach all the hosts, some addresses. We have them as show, SHOW, at CoCoCrew.org, podcast, PODCAST, at CoCoCrew.org, feedback, FEEDBACK, at CoCoCrew.org. And again, all 3 of those will reach all of the normal hosts. If you want to reach one of the normal hosts, well, normal perhaps is a subjective term, but all the regular hosts, If you want to reach us individually, then I'm available as John, John, at CoCoCrew.org. Neil is available as Neil, Neil, at CoCoCrew.org. Mike is available as, of course, Mike, Mike, at CoCoCrew.org. And though he's not here at the moment, Boise is available as Boise, Boisy, at CoCoCrew.org. That is our normal set of announcements. I do have a plug here for Retro Challenge, which is now over for the month of April. Unfortunately, I've been, had other things going on and mixed with some laziness, I guess, and haven't quite finished up the final reviews and announcement of winners. But if you do check out the Retro Challenge page, it'll give you an idea of what's going on. Hopefully, by the time you hear this, I might have announced some winners. And you can start preparing for the next challenge, which is currently scheduled for October, although I'm thinking of moving it to September. Well, we'll see. With that said, we'll move on to our current list of events that we think are of interest to our listeners. Coming up next is CorgsCon. This is for June 2nd, 2018. And this is the Columbus, Ohio Retro Gaming Society. Having their little gaming convention, big gaming convention, or it looks like a cool event. I think Mike said that he's going to be expecting to go out there, and sure we'll have some other friends that can go and tell us about it. I have not been myself yet, but it looks like a fun party.
Go and check it out.
Check it out. For those on the other side of the pond, June 16th, 2018, in the Cambridge area will be the Dragon Meetup 2018, hosted by Tony Jewell at the Center for Computing History. Again, that's in Cambridgeshire, or Cambridgeshire, or something, however they pronounce it. That looks fun, huh? All right, then coming up in July, of course, July 16th to 22nd, will be Kansas Fest. Kansas Fest is the Apple II event where they go and occupy a space in a college dorm for most of a week or all of a week, or it might as well be a week. It's a pretty cool event. It usually has some good technical content, plus plenty of geek social content. Should be some fun. Looks like they're still calling for session proposals. I think they're not full yet in terms of registration, but last I heard they were getting closer to 80 some. So not quite full, but I wouldn't wait too long if you're interested in going. We have a little bit of a gap, but currently with the last event on our schedule, we are listing is, of course, Tandy Assembly 2018. This will be held November 10th to 11th of 2018 in Springfield, Ohio. The website will be seeing some updates soon related to more information on the show, and so add a bookmark, keep an eye on the page.
It is going to be November 10th and 11th in Springfield, Ohio. But like you said, we'll have more details on our webpage very soon. We'll be opening it up for general registration, so you can pre-purchase.
Awesome. Definitely a big event. Definitely one we want to support as much as possible here. We're definitely looking forward to that coming up in about 6 months. All right. Well, that covers our announcements for this month. So why don't we take another little break, and we'll be back with some news.
What's going on, CoCo Cruisers? The original gamer Stevie Stroh here, and I'm the host of CoCo Talk. What is CoCo Talk, you ask? Well, we are a weekly live talk show on YouTube featuring the Tandy Color computer. And guess what? CoCo Talk is now also available as an audio podcast for your listening pleasure. So when you are done listening to the CoCo Crew podcast, come check us out at cocotalk.live for weekly live talk featuring the Tandy Color computer. We'll see you there, CoCo Cruisers.
Steve Strobridge is the hottest thing to hit the CoCo world since Lonnie Falk. Each week the world tunes into CoCo Talk and listens to Steve's take on the CoCo world. But what of the decades before his sudden emergence on YouTube? Find out in Felicity Voigt's new unauthorized biography, Gameplay Goodness, the Steve Strobridge story from Tab Books. Follow Steve's early days with the CoCo One and how he caught the eye of recruiters from the Army's counterintelligence corps and used his CoCo One to become a Black Ops phenomenon. Twice recipient of the BME and Barack Radna. Learn how his under-the-radar military career landed him behind the scenes of one of America's most popular cooking shows. Follow Steve's meteoric rise as a Vegas nightclub owner to the heartbreaking accident that permanently destroyed his chance for a place on the U.S. Olympic curling team. Gameplay goodness is a roller coaster ride of unbelievable daring, audacity, conspiracy, and dumb luck. You will be shocked, thrilled, and transformed by the truth. Available at Amazon.com and wherever fine books are sold. Gameplay Goodness, the unauthorized biography of Steve Strobridge from Tab Books.
All right, welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. It's time for our news segment for this month. We've got several items. I think we're going to try to pass them around a little bit, but I'll go ahead and start. Announcement from Mr. Roger Taylor. This is a post to AtariForum.com saying that he is considering a TRS-80 CoCo port to Mister. So as you might know, Roger's been working for a while on an FPGA CoCo project built around the DE0 Nano. MIST is a FPGA board kind of built originally. Well, the original MIST was for emulating, I guess, the Amiga and or the Atari ST. I guess Mister is a new variant of that. Roger's looking to retarget his FPGA-based design to this piece of hardware that's sort of purpose-built for emulating computers in general. So maybe it satisfies some of the requests for FPGA-based designs that feel a little bit more like a computer rather than just a development PCB. What do you think, guys? I personally don't take a lot of interest in the FPGA projects, but maybe you guys do. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not a huge FPGA guy myself either, but however, I did just recently pick up the DE1. I got one of those, so I haven't really played much with it. But I always prefer the real hardware. I'm not even an emulator guy for on software-wise.
Yeah.
I've always preferred real hardware. I know it takes a lot more room, but it's
Yeah, I'm the same way. I like working on the original hardware. I mean, I appreciate the FPGA stuff, and don't knock anybody that's into it. But yeah, personally, it's just not my thing. I like using the original hardware.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of where we're all at. If anybody's ever wondered why we don't cover the FPGA stuff a lot, it's just because we don't play with it a lot.
yeah.
We just don't know what to talk about much. So you said the DE1, Neil, I guess that's the CoCo 3 FPGA board.
Yes. Yeah.
I do have one of those. I did load that up once and saw that it seemed to be working, and then I think I put it back in the box and said, well, now what?
Yeah.
But anyway, some people do seem to really enjoy the FPGA projects. Some people seem to think we're on the verge of some sort of CoCo hardware apocalypse where the FPGAs will be the only option. I hope they're wrong.
Yeah, same here.
The old hardware myself, but if we do ever get there, I guess I'll be glad that they've been working on this so we can have something. So, all right. So I think that covers that one. The next one on the list, T-Trek Alpha. This is a Jim Gary game. It's a port of the traditional style Star Trek games that are popular on audible computers. So he's got one says he's ported from the CoCo. So I guess the original was a Nitrous 9 version. Since he says ported from the CoCo, I'm guessing this is running on the MC10. So if you're looking for an MC10 Star Trek game, Jim has your back. Of course he does. Who else would have your back, right?
And that's cool to see him do a CoCo port on the MC10. That's neat.
Yeah, he's done several of those, and yeah, this one's definitely good. It looks good on the MC10.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing about the Star Trek games. They do have a lot of text with some kind of minimal graphics for showing maps and such, and they are pretty easily adapted to a wide variety of old platforms. So it's a good fit. Moving on, we've covered this one a bit. We talked about Billy Mitchell, who was known in vintage gaming circles for holding world record scores on a number of arcade games. He was famous for doing the first perfect Pac-Man game several years back. He's also sort of the villain of the documentary or somewhat documentary movie called King of Kong. Anyway, we covered in earlier shows how there's been some controversy about some videos that Billy had posted to support his high scores, and has determined that he was maybe using an emulator. I guess some of the sanctioning bodies don't allow emulators at all. Some of the sanctioning bodies allow them, but only under certain circumstances, which he apparently did not comply with. Anyway, so as that story's progressed, now Twin Galaxies, which is kind of like the main, most important sanctioning body for arcade competitions, they're the ones that get to decide who goes in the Guinness Book of World Records, for example, if I'm not mistaken. So they've taken issue with Mr. Mitchell and wiped out all of his high scores. So sort of a sad story. I think Billy was talking like he's going to push back with something, but I haven't seen it yet. So we'll see. But if you've been following the story at all, here's the next step.
And as we've said before, dozens of dollars at stake here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there might be a lot of hot sauce sales for Billy Mitchell in there, I guess. But.
Yeah. But it's sad, but it's also kind of a strange alternate reality to some sense.
Anyways, the next one is from Nick Marentes, and he is in the process of writing a game music composer. What's cool about this, it's software for the CoCo 3. So you can actually compose, game music on your CoCo.
Yeah, it looks pretty good.
Yeah.
Piano keyboard at one end, and almost looks like a player piano scroll going off to the right, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, he's got a sequencer in there, and
yeah. And you can choose like envelopes and stuff for the sound, which is all, I think in this case, is all under software synthesis. So this is not for using any of the available hardware devices at this point.
No.
But I guess maybe with the Orchestra 90, but basically it's for the CoCo DAC. So yeah, it looks good. It's good to have these kind of things in development.
Our next news item is from Michael Furman, and he is writing a DriveWire terminal for RS-DOS. It's a DriveWire 4 terminal program.
That's pretty cool. We had the little discussion and then eventually a little mea culpa a couple episodes back about related to the wireless internet modem devices or whatever. And it's like, well, it's basically our attitude had been sort of, well, that's cool, but couldn't you already do this with DriveWire? And then the kind of the rebuttal was, well, you can only if you're using Nitrous 9. And my thought was, well, that's just because nobody's written the software. Well, here, Michael Furman, or Mikey, as I think he likes to be called, he actually did write the software. So if you were looking to use your DriveWire 4-based network connections, but through a RS-DOS style program, here it is.
Yeah, that's very, very cool.
I was going to say, I think that could be very handy for RS-DOS users because, I mean, there seems to be quite a few out there that don't use Nitrous 9.
It allows them to use the AT commands to connect over the internet to BBSs and stuff through your CoCo and access DriveWire disks, etc. So nice package, and it was cool to meet Mikey at CoCo Fest.
Yep.
Yes, it was. Our next news item is from Michael Furman again. And he's writing a Python DriveWire server, and he actually had it at CoCo Fest. It was a 2018 release, so we all got to see a demo of it.
Yep, very exciting. I think he had done a similar release to the previous year. So he's continuing to work on it and add features to it. This is his implementation of the DriveWire spec, where he's implementing his server using Python rather than Java or C or whatever else. Kind of cool.
That's very cool.
DriveWire spec out there. It's good to have more than one implementation. Maybe at some point we'll have to have a little DriveWire summit of some sort to make sure all the implementations stay somewhat in line.
Yeah, for sure. It's nice to see DriveWire get some love again. It's definitely handy.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, hopefully Python will be a little more stable, or maybe even a little more portable.
Yeah.
True.
I think Java's been a disappointment over the years for this stated portability not really matching reality.
Yeah. It seems like when it updates and things break.
Yeah.
Our next news item is the first text adventure game I ever wrote, from Ken Rygard. This is a fun one. It's an adventure game he calls Spy, that he wrote in his youth, and he's posted it out there so you can take a look at it. It's always cool when people post stuff from the early 80s that they did as kids. It's just fun.
Yeah. It's cool to show that, see what people were doing back then, remind ourselves of what we thought was interesting back in the day, that sort of thing. Definitely great to share in there, Ken. Very nice.
Yeah, looking at the screenshots, it looks really neat too. He's got some graphics in there.
I think the last one we had that was similar to this was that Gilligan's Island adventure that someone made. That was pretty cool.
Right. Yeah.
Our next news item comes from Benj Edwards. How to preserve vintage electronics.
He's got some tips on, I guess, storage and dealing with certain kinds of problems that pop up and whatever else. Ooh, some spiders living in your old.
It's good practical advice. That's a good example of spiders. If you're storing something away, seal it inside something so that bugs and mice and things can't get into it.
Yeah, in fact, we similarly, I think Simon Johnson this week posted where some ants had taken up residence in a Commodore 64 of his. So he had quite a mess to deal with there.
Yeah, that looked pretty bad. I'm surprised it still worked after.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
As long as they don't destroy too much, if you can get them out.
Looking at this link right now from Benj Edwards, I'm seeing those bulging capacitors on that motherboard. That's awful. I mean, I've changed a lot of these caps. It seemed to be back in the early millennium. I don't know if it was just maybe the caps they used. They all seem to do this. I've done countless boards with this problem.
It's usually a good idea to replace the electrolytic capacitors, even if they're don't seem to be causing problems. It doesn't really hurt as long as you don't mess up your motherboard and by lifting.
Yeah, true.
Right.
If you don't know how to solder, take it to somebody who can.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's interesting as these machines get older, all the rubber parts and things start to turn to goo, and anything with a battery in it, you need to take the batteries out of it, or that'll cause you all kinds of grief. I know we found some old things that would work on AA's and C's. You've probably had those finds where, it looks great, and then you open the battery compartment and it's a nightmare.
Oh yeah.
Our next news item is from Brian Woodruff. I'm not sure anyone is interested about a cross-platform toolchain setup.
Which I think there probably are a lot of people that are interested in to one degree or another. People that want to use their modern machines and produce code for the CoCo or whatever. I'm not sure how popular this tool is. Maybe it's more popular than I realize. It's just something I personally don't use. Something called CMake, which is it would seem clearly that it's somewhat related to the Unix tool make, but also pretty different. And so I have seen it used in a number of projects over the years. Just I've never gotten too deep into it myself. So he's published a CMake, the contents of a CMake file, I guess. I can sort of I have an idea of what it's doing, but I wouldn't know how to modify it. But there are people who use CMake, and Brian apparently is one of them. And if you are familiar with CMake, you might find this useful. File this under the category of there's more than one way to do it. And so,
yeah, I think it's interesting. I always like to see these posts, even if I'm not using it. It's helpful to the community because invariably that's the kind of chain you're looking for, is one that works with whatever hardware platform. If you're Windows, you're looking for one thing. This works under Mac, so that's useful if you're a Mac person. And there's a lot of Linux people out there that want a Linux tool chain. So Good to hear them all.
He seems to be building around something called SLZ, including an SLZ loader. I'm wondering if that SLZ has something to do with Pac-Man port, something Glenn is an expert at with the SLZ. So I wonder if that's something that he's done, some sort
Could
of
be.
compressed binary or something like that. Well, let's see. I'll move on here. I temporarily fixed my CoCo 3 keyboard so that all keys now function. I use single strands of multi-strand wire and plumber's tape. This is Paul T. Barton. For those that are somewhat familiar with Paul Barton's projects, I think using plumber's tape and single strands of multi-strand wire and that sort of thing is kind of right up Paul's alley, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, so what he's fixed, he's basically got a keyboard Mylar with some broken traces. And so to replace the traces, he's taken a stranded wire and kind of pulled the strands out and run them. I might would have done this with, say, wire wrap wire or something like that, some other small wire. Or a lot of people do this kind of repair with conductive paint or whatever, like you'd use to repair, say, a back windshield heater or something like that. It's just kind of cool. I like to show people doing things at all different levels of both expertise and technological levels or whatever. I like to see some brute force approaches sometimes, and that's kind of what this is. So
yeah, whatever it takes to keep it going.
That's right. So very cool. Thank you, Paul.
Does your CoCo 3 run hot? Are you using an older Model 512K RAM upgrade? Or maybe you have a 128K CoCo 3 that could use more memory. The Triad 512K memory board from Cloud9 is the solution you're looking for. Named for its unique triangular shape, the Triad only draws about 22 milliamps of current. That's an amazing 95% reduction in power. Less power means less heat and less stress on your color computer 3. The Triad 512K memory upgrade has been in production since 2013 with more than 500 units sold. So whether you need to upgrade to 512K or want to replace an older power-hungry memory board, the Cloud9 Triad is the proven, reliable 512K solution. Often copied, never duplicated. The Triad 512K upgrade from Cloud9. Cool stuff for your color computer. Visit cloud9tech.com for details.
Okay, climbers, this is Avalanche Country, so let's keep it quiet. So what have you been up to lately? Oh man, I've been having a blast with my TRS-80 Model 3 and 4. What's making it so fun? I've added the M3 SE from Bartlett Labs. What's that? It's the Model 3 System Expander. It gives you solid-state hard drives on compact flash, Ethernet, a real-time clock, and you can connect an SVGA monitor. That's incredible! It also has an Atari 2600 compatible joystick port. You can play games like never before. Wow! Shh. Sorry. It works with the Model 3, 4, 4D, and 4P. The 4P can even automatically boot from a hard drive image. Where can I get one? Get carried away with your TRS-80 Model 3 or 4 with the Model 3 System Expander. Visit bartlettlabs.com for details and pricing.
Next one from Ed Snyder. And Ed Snyder has been working on a 4-port MPI replacement, kind of in the same vein as the 2-port one that he's been selling for a while, with the addition of RS-232 ports and an OPL3 sound port. Basically a Sound Blaster equivalent sound chip on it. And so here he's saying, I was held up waiting for some parts, but I have a prototype built and it's looking good. So, and this is time to work on the CPLD configuration. He's announcing he made some progress. And then the next one I have here from Ed, I guess he got his CPLD configuration at least basically working. This says he hacked together a player for the chip and he published some recordings that he made playing the chip. So if you follow the link and then follow the link in the link, there's some M4A files and there's some music there. And so you can play it. It sounds pretty good. I'm not really sure what the source of the music was, if he took some existing chip tunes or if it's something he composed himself or whatever. I really don't know. But if you're interested in the Sound Blaster chip on a 4-port MPI, then Ed is got some stuff available for you to look at.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that he went with 4 ports like the original, which I don't know. I think over time that seems to be the sweet spot for MPI. There's a lot of people that seem gaga over having 16 ports. I don't know what you would do with that, but I guess you're just too lazy to plug in a game card. I don't know.
Yeah. Unless you're setting up kind of the mega Nitrous 9 system with a bunch of serial ports for terminals or whatever, or if you've got some really specialized need, it is hard to see why you need more than about 4 ports for an MPI. But I'm sure there are people who do need them. There was somebody back in the day that provided a 6-port one. Jim Brain now has an 8-port one. Apparently you can plug 2 of those together. It's sort of mind-blowing, but whatever.
Well, that might be good to put out to the audience here. If you have an application that needs more than 4 MPI ports, we'd be interested in hearing that. Or if you're a person that's interested in the 16-port MPI, we'd like to hear your reasoning behind it.
That'd be cool.
Get some feedback.
Be some great feedback to have. You could either write it to us, or you could record something, or you could just join us on the show. Just let us know. Sharing my Deft Pascal toolchain with the community. So this is another kind of toolchain thread. This is from Andre Ballista, and he's taking Deft Pascal, which I guess is available in the Color Computer Archive. I guess he's got some scripts and combined with emulator and a tool that actually can feed like keystrokes to the emulator to kind of allow you to basically edit, on your Windows machine or whatever, and then sort of press a button and go, and it'll bring up the emulator and run Pascal on the emulated CoCo and compile it or whatever. And pretty cool. If you like Pascal, this might be a cool way to run some. Or if you don't know much about Pascal, this might be a cool way to learn some about it on the CoCo. I think it's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. And I think we were talking about emulators earlier. I think that is one useful area for the emulators. I know I've done stuff like that with emulators to automatically launch after you've compiled something. It's handy.
They definitely are handy for, like you say, to be able to develop on an offline system or a modern PC or something. Particularly if you're absolutely sure that the code you're writing is going to work. If you're not pushing the limits of hardware or that sort of thing, you just want something that you're pretty sure will eventually run on the CoCo, but you don't need to do so right now. That's a good way to do it.
All right, our next news item is from James Diffendaffer, and it's patching the CoCo ROM. This is patch number 1.
Yeah, so James has been working, I think for a long time he was working on the MC10, going through that ROM and trying to find some optimizations and improvements to be made there. And I think this patch is sort of a byproduct of the work he was doing on the MC10, where they kind of had the same type of optimization available, could work on the CoCo ROM. I might be reading that completely incorrectly, but that was my impression. And so he's basically improving the speed of multiply, I think is what it is, which, multiply is kind of slow, particularly in BASIC. So anything you can do to help that out is a win. So very good. Thanks, James.
All right, our next item is from Jamie Chow, and he's released the CoCoFest 2018 slides from his presentation he did at CoCoFest, and it was on programming game development. Actually, it was a sprite engine, and he's using Docker.
Yeah, he had an interesting combination of things there. He's using DynoSprite and using CMOC. He's putting versions of those tools together inside of a Docker container, which sort of is something that you could then distribute the Docker container to other members of the community so that everybody you're working with will all be using the exact same set of tools. is a fairly modern approach to solving that particular problem. So that's good. And so here he's published the slides from the presentation he did at CoCo Fest, which I thought was really good.
Yeah.
So very good.
I regret that I didn't get a chance to talk to Jamie much at CoCo Fest. Just so much going on, but a great presentation. And like you said, it's a really modern approach. It's nice because you can just grab the container and you've got everything you need to go.
Like I said, I didn't get much time to spend a lot of time with him either. He kind of he moves like a ninja or something. But definitely it's great seeing him, and I look forward. I hope he stays doing the occasional drive-by of something cool for the community.
It's also neat to see someone so young, get involved in the CoCo.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's what we need,
Yep.
Our next news item is from Nick Marentes and Robert Galt, and it's for updating EdTASM 6309. Nick wanted to add the enhancement of supporting 80 by 28 line text display of the Gimme on the Color Computer 3 to make it a lot easier to code with.
Robert Galt's had this EdTASM 6309 available as an enhancement to the original EdTASM for a while, and then he does occasionally add some new features, somewhat by request, I guess. So if you're looking for a disk extended color based assembler, and you want to cover the 6309, you may want to pick that up from Robert Galt.
And he's selling this for $35, it looks like.
Yeah, it's still available. So if you're wanting to get into Editor Assembler on a CoCo, this is nice. It's based on the original Editor Assembler, but it does 80 columns on CoCo 3. So you'll definitely enjoy that if you're wanting to work from the CoCo 3 rather than cross development system.
It's more of a pure, authentic way, I guess, to code on the CoCo 3 like you did back in the day.
Yeah, certainly some people would prefer to do it that way. I think that's a debate that could be had about where to draw the line between authenticity and masochism. All right.
Our next link is from Mark Siegel. I want to take issue with Steve Bjork's comment on the MC10. The brunt of this is that Steve Bjork has kind of had it in for the MC10 because he always blamed the MC10's consumption of video chips is kind of what killed the Deluxe CoCo. And if you're not familiar with the Deluxe CoCo, it was a kind of a prototype model, and there are actually working ones in existence that contained a built-in RS-232 port, among other things. But Mark worked for Tandy, and he's saying, no, that isn't the case at all.
So what Mark's kind of implying here is that the Deluxe CoCo was going to use what became the 6847 T1 that's used in the later model CoCo 2s, which of course the MC10 did not use. And so if that's the case, then it seems unlikely that the MC10 could be causing a shortage of a video chip that it didn't use. I think, I'm not sure. It's one of those things. It's so long ago, it's kind of hard to know exactly what was said and done and whatever. And it could be that somebody said something that's been misinterpreted a bit, and maybe the repetition of the story kind of messes it up, or whoever. I don't know what to think. But I've always thought that picking on the MC10 was a little unfair. But whatever. People have their opinions, so there's a lot of sayings about that too. But you can't change them. But I thought that was an interesting point of fact there. So I guess we'll have to continue the debate later.
Mm-hmm. Our next link comes from Thomas Cherry Holmes. The Plato system that I've been putting together for the retro computing users is now open for testing.
Yeah. So this has been a big point of discussion in the retro world the past few weeks. I think, anyways, the notion is this Plato system was an online system that in some ways was almost more like a predecessor to Prodigy than anything else, because it was an online system that contained a lot of graphics content. Sounds like it's pretty cool, and there were some clients available for a variety of home computers at the time, including the Atari 8-bits, and I guess the TI-99 and maybe some others. Thomas Cherry Holmes has got a server he's gotten up on the internet that you can combine like with one of those internet modems, running one of those servers and or running one of these client softwares, and you can get your retro computer on with this retro service, I guess, and have access to a lot of this online content from quite a long time ago. And then he's interested in recruiting people from other various retro computing communities, including the CoCo, into producing clients for the various retro computers. Some people seem to express interest. I don't know if anybody's really put shoulder to the wheel on that yet or not, but we'll see. It might be another way to do some cool online stuff eventually. The notion that we could all get all the different retro computer communities together and sort of have a little kumbaya online experience and develop cross platform games and all that sort of thing, play online. I mean, it sounds nice.
Yeah. Kind of United Nations approach.
Yeah.
Which makes you skeptical.
Exactly.
I was checking it out. I mean, I don't know much about the platform, but, at the risk of saying this, if it is the ease of use to get at it, I mean, it might encourage some people. I mean that's the one nice aspect of being online, right? It's
Sure.
just the ease of access to it. So
Yeah, that is true. Our next link comes from Paul Thayer, and it's his Download to Game Development blog.
This game development blog concept has become popular, especially in all the various retro communities. Seems like I remember years ago doing one, which seemed to have become a popular thing in the CoCo community as well.
I think you pioneered that, John.
Well, maybe in CoCo world. Anyway, it's always cool to see somebody kind of keep a log of whatever project they're working on and talk about. Well, it kind of depends. Different people have different styles, and so some people use it as a way to. It's almost like a pedagogical exercise on teaching programming or their philosophy of programming or whatever. Other ones fall down into day 73. I had pickles for breakfast and juice for lunch, and then I broke my ankle at the end of the day. That sort of thing. So it can kind of range from really educational to just really reality TV or whatever. So far, I think Paul's pursuing more of an educational approach on this, so it might be good to tune into and read up on some of the tricks and tricks of the trade that he's sharing, or talks about some of the tools he's using, that sort of thing. If that sounds exciting to you, you may want to check it out. CoCo VGA release 0.89, software configurable characters. This, of course, comes from Brendan Donahue, the FPGA designer, I guess, behind CoCo VGA. So he's been adding functionality to this device, and so he's now got redefinable characters. So basically, you can change the way an A looks to make it look like a Gothic A or a Roman A, or not an A at all.
You might want to develop like graphic characters for a game or something.
Exactly. Pretty cool. Looks like he's got some documentation links there on how to update things and presumably how to program it, that sort of stuff. It's a nice little piece of hardware that's come out in the recent couple of years. It's pretty amenable to a lot of functionality, and certainly something people have used to extend text screens for like Infocom adventures, that sort of thing. It's a cool piece of hardware, and it's nice to see that Brendan's sticking with it and kind of continuing the value add. That's nice to see. All right. So moving on, the next link, we have a YouTube video from 6809 Coder. I still don't know who this guy is. At least now we've seen his face. He definitely looks the part.
Entertaining video, but we need to reach out to him to find out who he is.
Yeah, it's just kind of weird. It might be somebody we'd be familiar with if we actually knew his name, but I don't know who it is. So anyway, he's done it says Retro Computer Storage Showdown. So basically he's taken a few storage options like the CoCo STC. Looks like maybe he has one of those TX Duinos or whatever. And floppy drive. Not sure what else is in the video, but he's actually doing some measurements of different speed differences. No, it's not the TX Duino. I guess that's the HXC drive emulator. So there's some numbers if you want to know how these things stack up. There's a video for you. Waiting for you on YouTube. Go check it out. And if you figure out who 6809 Coder is, write us some feedback. Let us know.
Yeah.
All right. So here's one for the Dragon World, coming from Paris Surratt. And so he's taken the Infocom Adventure series and basically made them available for the Dragon 64. So the Infocom, we had this recently where, so first I guess Ed Snyder disassembled the Infocom interpreter and was doing some stuff, including adding support for the 64 column mode on the CoCo VGA. And then we got the original sources for the Infocom interpreter, and so I was playing with that some. And so we've had a few stories around that. And I did some blog posts on adapting the different Infocom games to the interpreter so you get a broader range of them. So I guess Per has taken the sources from that Ed shared with him and adapted them for the Dragon, which the Infocom interpreter actually did direct floppy disk access, and because the floppy disk controller on the Dragon differs somewhat from what's on the CoCo, to run on the Dragon, you'd actually need to adapt that code a bit. The Pair's done that and made this stuff available for the Dragon, and he's also made it available so that you can use the 64 column mode on the CoCo VGA if you have one installed in your Dragon. Looks like he's also added features where you can basically have essentially a boot disk for Infocom games in general, and then you can switch to other disks for the specific game so that you don't have to redo every one of the disks. You can basically keep one boot disk around. Pretty cool, kind of cool little project there for the Dragon. Good to see them benefit.
Attention disk users! Are you tired of I.O. errors and lost directory failures? No! Then you need the power of gold! Virtually eliminate dreaded disk I.O. errors. The tinned connectors on your disk controller can oxidize, causing poor electrical connection between the computer and disk controller. Our gold connectors are soldered permanently to the connectors on your disk controller and provide gold contact between the disk controller and computer. The gold connector kit includes 2 connectors and complete instructions for easy installation for just $17.95 plus $1 shipping. Or send your disk controller to us and we'll install gold edge connectors for you for just $35.95 plus $4 return shipping. Give your computer the power of gold! From Brantex Incorporated, Color Software Services Division.
What makes Daddy feel like doing flips?
What gives Mother such happy fits?
A CoCo that's simply super fine. Take a close look at the CoCo package. Now, get CoCo today. Remember the name CoCo. You'll love its wonderful thrill.
Back to more retro goodness with the CoCo crew.
Jim Gary has released a Kinder Morgan from the MC-10. It's a classic text-adventure type style game, and it's ported from Micro Color Basic.
Yep, very cool. Nice to see some work on the MC-10. Like I said, as usual from Jim Gary, he definitely keeps us with plenty of games to play. That was cool too. This was getting some attention from this other site, Game Jolt. I don't know much about that, but seems to be reaching out with getting some other retro community attention for his work lately, so that's cool.
Yeah, that's great. Definitely a lot of he's boosted the library of the MC10, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Getting exposure for it.
Is the library of the MC10.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of that, he's released the next news item from Jim Gary. He released Moon Shuttle for MCX.
So I guess that's using the MCX 128 extended hardware for the MC10. Presumably he might be using some of the basic extensions built into that as well. So
yeah, that's the expander, right, for the MC10?
Yep.
Darren Atkinson, I think, made that.
Darren Atkinson did it originally, and then he turned manufacturing over to Ed Snyder. I assume they're still available. You'd have to contact Ed to be sure.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Next news item is brought to you from Peter Krumans. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it's low-level bit hacks you absolutely must know.
Yeah. So these are kind of cool, and it's basically hacks around the way numbers are represented, in binary. Lets you extract some other information about the numbers. So things like, how do you figure out if a number is even or odd? It's pretty simple, right? But maybe not everyone knows it. Things like, how do you tell if a certain bit is set, or how do you turn a certain bit on or off, that sort of thing, with some basically C-style expressions to explain that. Most people probably know most of this stuff or can figure it out, but, maybe not. And so it's always kind of cool to see kind of mathematical manipulations that people can find. Some of the ones at the end, like turn on the rightmost bit or whatever, not exactly obvious. So you might have come up with them on your own, but it might be a little bit difficult. So, you never know. But anyway, so I thought that might be cool for some budding programmers out there.
Well, for sure. I mean, it's something you need to know.
Our next link is from Robert D. Grapple, Optimizing Integer Division by a Constant Divisor.
I came across this one about the same time as I came across the last one, so I kind of threw them in sort of in the same category of what do mathematicians think about when they're bored, or what did they used to. And the point being is sometimes the answer to how do you solve a certain problem or how do you solve a problem most efficiently, sometimes the answer is, well, you redefine it to be a different problem. And that's sort of what's happening here. They're trying to figure out how to do a division by a certain value and replace it with some adds and subtractions and shifts or whatever, which is generally speaking easier to do. So like the 6809 has a multiply instruction but no division. You can sometimes get away with, in certain cases, by being able to do a multiply by a reciprocal. Not always easy to do, at least computationally, in the middle of the program or whatever. But anyway, sometimes it's cool to know some of these tricks. So these are sort of in the same line as knowing the bit flipping tricks that Neil was just talking about.
Our next link is from John Kowalski, also known to most of us as Sockmaster. I'm aiming to do something really retro with Donkey Kong Remix. Not clear what he's doing other than he mentions he's trying to make a super accurate, arcade accurate.
So yeah, I wasn't sure, this isn't strictly speaking news, but I thought it would be pretty exciting to people to think that Sockmaster, who's clearly a Donkey Kong expert, was working on something. And the picture he's thrown up there is basically like a sprite map showing some of the different pieces of graphics that are available in Donkey Kong. Although from the look of it, he's converted it to like a P-Mode 4 style of, 4-color, black, white, red and blue, or orange and blue, or whatever it is. But anyway, not a ton of news here, but maybe it's something to look forward to.
Knowing Sockmaster, he's going to surprise us.
Our next link is from Rutherford LeBlanc. For anyone using TCP/SER, here is the command line in Linux that works for me.
Yeah, so I threw this one in, for those of us who are smugly sit back and harumph at the the serial port to internet modems and talk about, well, DriveWire has been doing that for forever. Well, here's this TCP SIR, TCP SCR, whatever, however you exactly pronounce it, but basically TCP SIR does what DriveWire does, and it allows a machine to listen to a serial port and then provide the same kind of service that DriveWire is providing in terms of being able to go out the serial port over a telnet session or whatnot. So in case you thought we were all just a bunch of old DriveWire snobs, well, here's Rutherford LeBlanc pointing out that even the DriveWire guys weren't exactly the first ones to the party. So, but seriously, if you're interested in doing that sort of thing, and for whatever reason you don't want to acquire one of the newer hardware devices, and you don't want to set up a DriveWire server, but if you happen to be Linux friendly enough to run TCP SIR, well, here's another option for you. So, pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, definitely. Kind of in line with like the Wi-Fi modems we've talked about too. Gives you that kind of functionality.
Yeah.
Seems to me this is it's all coming back, right? It's serial ports is a hot thing right now, or serial communication, I should say.
Yeah, maybe too hot, but yeah.
Yeah, they were all popular on these retro computers. That's what you had. So.
All right, we'll move on to the last few here. Got a couple from Darren Grant. The first one, I've just published a Color Basic extension for Microsoft VS Code. I guess it's Visual Studio Code, which I take to be an editor that's part of the Visual Studio package from Microsoft. And then he also has one made a start on a 6809/6309 assembly extension for VS Code. If you write much source code, it won't be long before you discover that not all editors are the same. Some are more convenient to your workflow than others. And many people then find that certain editors that are customizable based on what language you're programming in, and then become even more friendly to your workflow. So here, Darren has provided the extensions to this VS Code editor. So if you want to write Color Basic or assembly language code, you can make the editor as friendly as possible. So sounds cool. I personally don't use Visual Studio or anything like it, just because I'm a crufty old Unix guy that likes to use a VI editor and the Makefile.
Same here.
But if that doesn't describe you, especially if you are more of a Microsoft and a Windows kind of person that is excited about the idea of using a tool from Microsoft, then maybe this is a way for you to go.
Yeah, it's cool Darren shared that because, it's just like the tool chains, right? Everybody has their own preferences. It's just nice to know you got the options and that they're available.
Yeah, and sometimes it's good just to see what someone else has done. It may not be what you end up doing, but sometimes one can inspire you to do your own thing or whatever.
Yeah.
All right, so our final news thing this month, I'm actually going to, this is my turn to say, but I'm going to back out and let Neil talk about it because it's his news item.
All right.
Neil, why don't you tell us about your BBS?
All right. But the last news item is from myself, and I'm proud to announce my original BBS, which was called Internal Affairs, and I ran it. Internal Affairs ran from 95 to 97. Well, it's back. It was exciting. Late last year in December, I found my old backup floppies that I made just before I took the board down and put it to rest. And when I found those floppies, I started looking. I did the restore on it. The disk's actually read, and I got excited. All that nostalgia, seeing all that work I did back then. And so I started a project on the side. It wasn't really CoCo related, but it was to get the BBS adapted to work over the internet through Telnet. And so it's done. It's on the air and working. And although it's not CoCo related, which is kind of neat to see, though, is a lot of CoCo users are using it. And they're actually using real CoCo 3 with Twilight Terminal from Sockmaster. So it supports the full ANSI graphics. And
Nice.
It looks great. Yeah.
That's cool. What's that running on?
It's running on an old quad core, a Q6600 Intel chip, and just a small solid-state drive, and it's running well.
That's very cool. It's internal affairs. Is that anything like Ashley Madison?
No, but there's actually a little story behind it, though. The reason why it was called internal affairs is back in the day when I ran the board, I had four nodes plus a fifth private node, and somebody actually got married from my BBS. Like it was a big chat. A lot of people used to call the chat through multi-node.
Yeah.
And so that's why I named it that. And it was just, so I kept it ever since.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. It was actually Neil that got married. That's what he's not telling you.
No. Be a cool story, though.
All right. Cool story, bro. Right. All right. Well, very cool. It's nice to get that personal or personal to the team piece of news in. But that's our last news item for this month. So we're going to take another little break, and we'll be back with some feedback.
Are you a new high school graduate excited about computer science and technology? Are you a professional just looking for a career change? Then Tandy University is for you. The Neil Brookings College of Color Computer Studies offers a variety of exciting courses designed to give you real-world color computer skills.
I chose Tandy University because of their emphasis on the CoCo 3 and OS 9. I just finished my associate degree, and I'm well into the 4-year degree program. One of the coolest things about the program is that you actually get to build a CoCo 2 as a prerequisite to your other courses. So you're really immersed from day one.
I received my degree from Tandy University. The Color Computer Studies program prepared me for a fulfilling career developing radar defense software on 6809 platforms.
Tandy University professors provide an excellent learning environment both in the classroom and online.
No other university provides this depth and focus on the color computer. Our Fort Worth campus is beautiful and modern. We have a very sizable color computer lab. This fall, we will be cutting the ribbon on the new Mark Siegel Memorial Library, which will feature an extensive periodical and book collection.
Tandy University is now accepting applications for the fall session. Our Fort Worth campus offers student dormitories as well as financial and scholarship assistance.
It's simply a delight and honor to teach students at Tandy University.
Don't miss your opportunity to expand your mind and your career. Call today, 800-LEARN-CoCo. Tandy University, where students excel.
Okay, folks, welcome back. Time for some feedback. We have a couple items this month. The first one comes from Steve Stroh. This is Steve Stroh, like the beer, who was on our episode 34 roundtable, not the infamous internet media host that you might be thinking of. Okay, anyway, so Steve says, one thing that I think is missing, which I also discussed on the episode 34 roundtable, is some easier way for a newcomer to the retro CoCo hobby to get themselves up to speed. And so, yeah, Steve's, well, thank you for the feedback. And I'd like to say I do appreciate the topic or the point that you're making there. And I know that there have been some efforts in the community made along those lines. So people producing like one-stop bucket sites for links to people's projects and all that sort of thing. Some are probably better than others. I don't know. I think kind of what you're suggesting is that maybe there should be kind of a regular newbie segment or whatever. And I think that I'd be fine with that. I think we'd be fine with that. The problem being is it's hard to have a segment like that because the person working on a segment like that for long isn't a newbie. and so, they kind of get to where they know enough to where they're back to the sort of the same situation where they're using the acronyms and abbreviations and nicknames, and they're stepping over things that, well, everybody knows that kind of thing. And so it becomes difficult to maintain. But I would invite you, while you consider yourself a newbie, to feel free to write down anything that you think would have been valuable for you to know, and or you could even produce your own audio segments or whatever, or or you could propose your own topics, and we could have either you put in particular, Steve, or another listener who has the same kind of inclination could come and join us. You could be part of the show. You could come on to the Facebook group and talk to us, or guide us on things that might be interesting to you. Like I said, the show is here for people to listen to, be part of the community. Certainly not here to make us rich. And none of us are going to be marrying a movie star or a member of English royalty anytime soon. So it's not doing that for us either. And so the show's here for you, for the community. And I just, any way that you think you can add to it, I would welcome you to try. So moving on, the second item of feedback this month says, thank you, hosts, for compliments on the graphics for Dig Dug by Jim Geary. Looking to see him work his magic on more of my mock-ups. Smiley face, if we continue the partnership, surely all CoCo users will have an MC10. That's from Carlos Camacho. I'm not sure we made it clear, or we may not even said. We complimented the graphics and some graphics, semi-graphics mode graphics that Jim Geary had published for some game concepts last time. I'm not sure we mentioned that Carlos was behind them. So here we are, Carlos. Carlos was behind them. He did several different mock-ups, several different games. They all look pretty interesting. So Carlos definitely has some talent for semi-graphics mode. So if you're looking to do a semi-graphics game, you may want to hit Carlos up for some advice on the graphics. All right. Well, thank you, Carlos. Thanks, Steve, for the feedback. That's pretty much all we have for this segment. So I think we're going to take another break, and we'll be back, with the rest of the show.
You know what's going on again at Radio Shack? That's right, honey. It's Tandy's Sweet System Sale. You get a Tandy Color Computer 3 with a dual FD501 disk drive system and your choice of either a DMP105 printer or a DCM212 modem for just $599. Most folks' $599 deal is not a system, honey.
These Apple disk drives are just $599.
That's not a system. Radio Shack is the place for a full system. Tandy's Sweet System Sale. Come and get it while it lasts, because it will not last long.
Love that CoCo from Tandy.
こんにちは。
アメリカから来ました。
お会いできて嬉しいです。英語が話せますか？
日本語が話せません。
私はアメリカ人です。さよなら。
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. A beautiful day in the neighborhood. Would you be mine? Oh, wait. Hi. So it seems that we've had someone sort of drop in on us and for a little visit during our recording this time. So we're going to just have a little fireside chat, I guess. Mr. Simon Jonason, or the Mad Simon, or whatever you're going by these days. Simon, how are you doing? How are things over there in Denmark?
Yeah, fine, thank you. Fine. Lots of stuff going on.
Were you up early this morning watching the royal wedding?
No, I wasn't actually.
Same here.
I guess it's more like noon for you, though, right? Or even afternoon for you. But anyway. What have you been up to recently? I saw you had a little bit of a tussle on the Facebook group with a kind of a well-known Facebook group contributor, shall we say. You want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, well, a couple of them actually, and they both came out of left field. And it's like, okay, fine. Some guy was asking some questions about okay, I can do like one voice music. How do we do multiple voice music? And I said to him, well, I can help you. And I presented it as a code, and someone proceeded to just whack my code, saying it was wrong and it didn't work. Well, I'm sorry, my ears say does work, and a lot of other people say it works. So,
Part of the criticism, I think, was stylistic, which maybe is comes down to more of a personal choice sort of thing. You're talking about your choice of sawtooth waves or whatever. I mean, you do seem to prefer that sort of style, but I mean, what's wrong with that?
the only reason I do that is for speed. I mean, don't get me wrong. It produces an inherent sawtooth. I mean, I could put any sample on top of it. I could put any envelope on top of it, but that just adds more overhead. And to do demos, to do real-time vector graphics with arbitrary endpoints and stuff like that, with music playing, I need as much CPU time left as I can get.
Yeah, it's an economy choice.
Yeah, that's the only reason I do it.
Yeah, so basically, when you're feeding the DAC, you basically are just running a sort of a free running counter for your next DAC value.
If we're looking at how that actually works, we've got. If you look at how SoundChip works, take something like your Games Master cartridge with the SN chip in it, right? It's got counters, yeah. So basically, your frequencies are counters, and when your counter overflows, it will trip a bit, and it produces a square wave. The beauty about the SN chip there is that it will do it all by itself. You don't have to service it all the time. You give it a certain count on one of its 3 frequency registers, and it will just count, and then it will trip the waveform.
Right.
But because the CoCo's only got a 6-bit DAC, you need to service that counter all the time. You're actually making like a pseudo sound chip by having a counter that overflows. For me, I've heard a lot of music on the CoCo that just sounds, I don't know, there's a lot of old stuff, old game stuff, and yes, it's nice. Don't get me wrong, it's all sinus wave. Maybe a little bit of square wave here and there, but I'm not hearing any real difference. Yes, you've got 4-voice harmony, stuff like that. I'm not hearing any slides, all kinds of strange stuff going on. I probably should at some point actually present a totally different sound routine where you can play any kind of sound you want. But at the moment, I'm just working on the demo, and the guys that are doing my graphics and the guys that are doing my music for me for this international demo competition understand the limits of what I've made and can make it sound like nothing you've ever heard before.
Let's say you were doing a drum thing. If instead of a nice precision drum, all you had was an overturned trash can, but the person playing the drum knew they were playing a trash can, then they could still make the trash can sound the way they wanted it, and it still would be correct. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yes, it is. It's a question of pushing a limit, still making it sound okay within a certain limitation.
And I just have to say, I got to chime in here. The sound you're getting out of the CoCo is just incredible. You know, you think there's actually some sound hardware, and it's just the DAC. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and I'm taking 28% CPU on that.
That's incredible.
It takes 100%. I heard experts say that.
Well, that was a topic last week. That it's like, well, if you want decent sound, you have to take 100% of the CPU. Well, sorry, which planet do you live on?
Certainly true that it does take some CPU time, and the more you put into the sound, the more CPU time it takes. But, like I say, it doesn't have to take 100%. You certainly can squeeze some of that. You can take certain shortcuts. Like you say, one of the things you're doing with producing the sawtooth wave is pretty simple to produce. And so that leaves you a little extra CPU time that you could devote either back to the main program or to doing more embellishments in the sound.
Oh yeah, and the other thing is I just use an IRQ, and I do that for one simple reason. For one, I know that my sound routine, my 2-voice sound routine, is always going to take the same amount of cycles, and I can just dedicate a fast IRQ to saying, okay, I'm going to hit you at 7.8 kilohertz, and this way I know that okay, I'm losing 42 cycles out of 114 every second scan line, so I know exactly what's going on. And I think that's the problem with a lot of other music routines that, we've got the old games where you have like a game freeze up and we just play a tune or something like that. It's all about timing and whichever note you have or whatever, you need to time the waveforms and stuff like that. And that's probably what a lot of people don't realize is a lot. If you take the time to actually time the code and say to yourself, okay, I want a certain playback frequency. I want to service this routine at a certain interval. Then you can actually construct a frequency table, which would be totally correct. If we take something like the note A4, which is 440 hertz, you can make a 16-bit number out of that, which will be we were talking about the SN chip with its frequency registers and stuff like that. So this is where your counter, which will overflow at one point in time via cumulative addition. All my music routines actually use a mathematically calculated frequency table.
Sure. Yeah. Timing is extremely important. Like I say, not just for the sequencing, the actual what you think of as playing the tune or whatever, but for actually generating the tone itself, you have to do service things at the right frequency, the right rate.
What you're actually doing and the reasons you're doing is because you're essentially multitasking.
Yeah. Yes, I am. Which, in other words, I need a certain rate and a set rate all the time. And I mean, I could take my frequency table, for example, on the CoCo 2, we don't have the luxury of a timer IRQ. I've done that in a tricky-dicky way instead. Because on the CoCo 2, we've only got the IRQ, because the fast IRQ is tied to the cartridge and stuff like that, or the RS-232 port. It's not tied to anything else. But what I'd done was actually do a vectored H-sync IRQ and made sure my note player routine was just over 57 cycles, because then it would skip a line. So then it would inherently time it to 7.875 kilohertz and give me about 50% CPU time. So it was a nasty trick, but that's how I did real-time vector graphics on the CoCo 2 with 2-voice music.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a cool trick. For those that maybe aren't following exactly, so the horizontal sync will fire at 15 kilohertz or whatever. That interrupt will occur. So it'll fire and it'll trigger an interrupt request for the CPU, which will take a certain amount of time to process. Now, if the handler returned basically as fast as it could, then the problem is a few cycles later, it'll take so many cycles just because of the interrupt. I mean the register stacking that happens in response to the interrupt, that you'll only have a few more cycles before the next interrupt fires, which means that you spend almost all of your time stacking registers and accomplishing nothing effectively. But if after you've stacked the registers, you actually have the CPU do something a little bit longer that gets you past when the next interrupt would fire, it effectively becomes sort of a no-op when that interrupt fires. And so if you've been doing something and basically you return just after that second interrupt fires, then that basically leaves most of that next period to do whatever else. It's a neat trick that you get, you're close to half the available CPU time and still get to have a constant rate of interrupting that you can use for generating tones or whatever else.
It's pretty trick. I mean, it was pretty hard to figure out, and I've got to give Sockmaster credit for telling me that, okay, just make it take 2 cycles longer, and then you've got a lot more CPU time,
Yeah.
And we all know Sockmaster is the master of hacking.
Indeed.
on the MC10, we've got the luxury of a timer, but we don't have a 6-bit DAT. We've got a 1-bit output instead. But we can still make that 1-bit output sing 2 voices if you want to. It's just a case of doing pin pulses. I mean, if you want to achieve something, you will achieve something. That's just my whole outlook on everything. I mean, it might take you a long time, but if you want to achieve it, you will.
Yeah, very cool. Well, so what sort of things are you working on these days?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm helping out. I'm helping out various people with a few questions here and there. I mean, I get questions from my protege, Paul Thayer. Get a lot of questions from Lee Patterson, various other people. But yeah, at the moment, I'm working on a CoCo 3 mega demo with an international group. Obviously, someone sat up and took notice when I'd done a CoCo 2 demo, where I had 2 voice music playing. I was doing fire, real-time vectors, you name it, like rotor zooming chessboard, stuff like that. So someone sat up and took notice and said, well, okay, this is not a platform we've seen, so let's do a demo on it. And I'm saying, well, no, not the CoCo 2, let's do a CoCo 3 demo instead. So I'm part of an international demo group called Desire, where all of a sudden I'm not a one-man band anymore.
That's cool.
I've got graphics guys, I've got music guys, I've got a coordinator, stuff like that.
Oh, this is exciting. It's one thing I've always felt that CoCo was lacking. I was always envious back in the day with my friends that had other machines, like Commodore 64 and PC, is that they all had demo groups. And the CoCo was always lacking that, so it's exciting that you guys have formed this. This is great.
Yeah, the funny thing is that the coordinator, a lot of these guys are either from Holland or Germany. Actually, the musician Aaron is from Canada.
That's awesome.
So the music you heard there, Neil, is one of your fellow Canucks.
Cool.
So, but yeah, it just kind of feels so good to not just be a one-man band where you have got to just slog away and how am I going to draw that? And you've got someone really talented that could draw something for you in 5 minutes, not 5 minutes, but a lot faster than you could, because that's what they do.
Right. Yeah. And that's what's great. You work as a team, because everybody is good at something. So if you all, work together, then you get a nice product, good outcome.
That's what's going on at the moment. So I mean, I know, and I've shown you some stuff, John, and I've shown you some stuff, Neil. But it's only it's just the tip of the iceberg, I think.
And what I've seen so far is very impressive. It's amazing. It's coming from a CoCo 3.
Yeah, it is impressive stuff. Very fun to watch.
I think the funniest thing I did recently was actually loading from disk while playing music, because everyone said, well, that cannot be done because you've got a hole in a microcontroller.
Got around that.
Yeah, so I kind of got around that, yes. It's a bit funky. It's like, well, okay, yes, I've got a hole in a mic, but if I just do a single sector read and then I hit my music routine after the sector read, I'm not worried about the speed I'm loading from disk. I'm worried about my music not breaking up. I mean, I can just load in the background on the fly. I mean, I only need to load a sector here, a sector there, and a sector there. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think so.
If you look at the C64 with the 1541 drive on it, the 1541 had an onboard 6502, and you could actually it also had 2K of RAM on the drive, so you could actually offload a program into the drive where the drive would take care of itself and just send signals to the serial port. But we don't have that luxury on the CoCo. So what I do is okay, instead of using normal deep B routines, stuff like that, I program the FDC directly and say, okay, I want to read a sector. I want to read this many sectors and have interrupt at the same time, because the interrupt will come in as long as the NMI is not there. The NMI is only really used to stop a process on the FTC. It would have been a lot better if I got a no halt controller, but I've done it with a halt controller. I could probably rant on about that for ages and ages and ages, but it's just another pushing the limit, because it's like I most of my demos were done back in the day on the C64 or on the PC, and I just, when I got back into retro computing, I grabbed my C64. I did. Don't get me wrong. I showed my son my C64, and then I said to him, "Well, I'm going to show you something way cooler than that." And I grabbed the CoCo, and ever since I grabbed it, I got like, "Oh yeah, this is your first computer. Now you know shit, so let's do something." So having all the luxuries we've had from the C64, the Amiga, the PC, stuff like that, I'm thinking, well, okay, it's time to push this little baby.
And push it, you have definitely been cool to see some of your demos and such. Anything else on the horizon? You just want to do demos, and that's what's exciting, and you're going to continue to do that, or is there games or other utilities or anything like that on the horizon? Or
I don't know. I mean, I've always been a demo guy. I mean, when I wasn't doing demos, I was cracking games on the C64. All the pieces don't matter, But I mean, at the moment, Paul Thayer's working on Downland 2, and I mean, we did it. Well, obviously, I taught him assembly from ground up. I mean, he didn't even know bits from bytes. I mean, he was a very proficient basic programmer. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, he's doing Downland 2, and we're working on that kind of together, because he kind of throws a question here and there, and how can we do that? How can we do that? We have a good question, good session, talking either phone or actually a chat session, stuff like that. And he's like, well, come on, just get this CoCo 3 demo done and get out of your comfort zone and do a bloody game.
Yeah.
He's like, I've got 10,000 ideas for you to do a game, I'm thinking, okay, you got me. You pinned me down. Comfort zone,
Yeah, definitely.
And what I do have lined up, and I've been working on it for a couple of years, off and on, is an arcade port of Bombjack.
Cool.
So I mean, I've got all the graphics, the original graphics for Bombjack and stuff like that. Of course, stuff needs to be changed here and there, resolution, stuff like that. I've actually sampled the original samples from the AY chip and stuff like that, and I've compressed that into 1-bit samples. So yeah, that's an ongoing project. So at some point, we should see a Bombjack port.
Oh, that's sweet. The CoCo 3 will be a good platform for that game.
Exactly, yes. Besides that, I mean, what makes me tick is helping other people. The more you can teach someone, the better.
Yeah, it's great you're there for everybody in the community, to keep these software projects rolling.
Definitely. I wonder if I could shift gears with a question here. I'm just curious about how you do development for this. I mean, do you do it all on the CoCo? Do you use a cross assembler? What's your process for working on code?
I'll tell you what. I only ever break out the CoCo whenever I need to. I use yeah, and that's actually funny, because if we go back to the flaming, someone commented on the fact that I actually used Notepad to code in. So I use Notepad on a PC. The only reason I do that is because I can do that on any PC anywhere, be it 2095. any PC I can code on Notepad. I don't have to install Notepad++, this, that, and the other. So I code on Notepad, and I use LW Assembler, LWASM to assemble. I use VCC. I use MAME, MES. I also use XRAW to test. Unless we're really, really timing critical, I don't break out the CoCo. So that's basically my process, and everything is just I don't use like batch files and stuff like that, or make file. I just work from a command prompt.
Yeah, nice, simple, clean. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. We had a lot of discussion about various tool chains during this episode, so good to hear what you're doing, what you're using.
I mean, if I want to put something on a virtual disk, I use image tool with a GUI on top of it. You know, like W image tool. That's basically image tool from MAME, but someone made a Windows GUI on top of it. You know, so yeah, I try to keep it as simple as possible. I know people using Visual Studio to code in, or even VS Code or something, where you've got like a 6809 shell on top of it. So the mnemonics and stuff like that have been accented. I mean, I'm sorry, I use that crap at work all day, so I want to keep it simple.
Yeah.
I don't like the autocorrect. I don't like the fact that if I type a tag, I don't want an ending tag. I will put my own ending tag when I want my own ending tag, you know. Let me be in control. I'm probably just old school.
Yeah, no school like the old school. Well, so any work on a Danish CoCo Fest?
Well, I think more European, actually, because we've got Fedor. Fedor and I were actually the only two, coconuts in Denmark. Then all of a sudden we've got a guy coming out of Copenhagen, Asger Bonnevie. And then all of a sudden we've got an influx from Germans, Belgians, people from Holland, guy from Sweden. I don't know if you saw on the Facebook group, a guy from Sweden got a CoCo 2 where he had a lot of problems with it, where I talked him through, okay, how to do this, that, and the other. He wanted a composite mod and stuff like that, 64K RAM, and how to solder the jumpers on it. And so, yeah, I think it would probably be more of a European event. I know there are a lot of German guys about.
Cool. Very exciting. Well, appreciate you calling in to be part of the show.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
It was great to have you on here.
Thank you for having me on the show. Catch you later, yeah?
TRS-80 Model 1 owners, supercharge your vintage computing experience with the Model 1 System Expander from Bartlett Labs. The Model 1 System Expander connects directly to the expansion port of your TRS-80 Model 1 or TRS-80 expansion interface. Boot directly into LDOS 531 from solid-state hard drive images stored on compact flash. LDOS is preloaded and ready to go. No boot floppy, no ROM modification necessary. Ready to go. Add a second compact flash card for even more hard drive space or easy hard drive backups. Eliminate manually entering the system date and time with a built-in real-time clock. Your Model 1 will automatically boot with the correct time and date every time. The built-in joystick port enables you to play your favorite TRS-80 games like never before. Just connect any Atari 2600 compatible joystick. Connect a modern flat panel monitor to your TRS-80 Model 1 through the built-in SVGA port. Display crisp 80-column text. Emulation for PCG-80 and 80 graphics devices provide high-resolution graphics capability fully integrated. The RJ45-10100 Ethernet port enables your Model 1 to network with modern computers. Ethernet. The Model 1 System Expander includes networking utilities, FTP, Telnet, TFTP, DHCP, and more. Easily move files to and from your Model 1 system from any modern computer with a drag-and-drop interface. Learn about these and even more features available with the incredible Model 1 System Expander at our website, bartlettlabs.com. That's BARTLETTLABS.com. Make your TRS-80 Model 1 what it was meant to be.
Supercharge your Model 1 with a Model 1 system expander. Only from Bartlett Labs. Bartlett Labs.
Minimum system requirements, TRS-80 Model 1 Level 2 with 16K of RAM. Pricing information available at bartlettlabs.com.
All right, welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. This is John, and I'm here to bring you the tech segment for episode 36, or at least my tech segment. Recently on Facebook, for the CoCo groups, there was a question about how do you do 4-channel audio or multi-channel audio, something like that. And I thought, well, this is a pretty decent question. And then elsewhere in CoCo Media, there was kind of an attempt to answer it. And, well, let's just say I kind of thought that maybe my own attempt to answer it would be worthwhile. Okay. Let's talk about some basics of CoCo hardware and how it relates to audio generation. So the simplest form of audio output on the CoCo is a 1-bit audio source. This is literally 1 bit in an output register that's tied, effectively tied to the speaker. And so it's just like on the Apple II or several other machines of the past where, basically you can flip the speaker on and off with 1 bit. That's really all you can do, is turn it on and off. Now, you can play some tricks with some really high frequency manipulation of that so that you basically manipulate the speaker faster than the range at a frequency higher than the range of human hearing, and you can get to a virtual, by turning it on and off and leaving it off more than on, or off more, whatever, you can get the effect of a intermediate output. Anyway, I'm going to leave that for another time, but let's just say that there is a single bit output, and generally speaking, there's a simple, just kind of a beeper is what people call it. Just as a side note, the 1-bit audio on the CoCo is always active. There's no way to disable it. Just don't use it if you don't want it, I guess. But it will always drive the speaker. I guess you can turn that 1 bit on the PIA to an input rather than output, but even then, whatever voltage is going to reside there, I guess. Anyway, why don't we move on? The other audio output, all the other audio outputs on the CoCo go through what's called the audio mux. It's really just half of the overall. There's a 2-channel mux that's related to for audio. Its output side is for audio. The input side feeds the DAC into the comparator for the joystick channels. So there's another side note. You actually switch both channels of the mux at the same time, which is why sometimes you'll get, or at least part of the reason why you get some noise when you sample the microphone or sample the joysticks while trying to produce audio output in a game on the CoCo. Anyway, the audio mux does have a single bit output so that you can block the audio sources that are feeding through the mux. It's not really part of the rest of the discussion, but it's part of the hardware overview. The output selects on the mux, there's really four places to select from because of the 2 bits that drive the mux. But in reality, there's really only 3 things, because one output is from the 6-bit DAC. The 6-bit DAC also becomes the output for the cassette port when you want to save audio out. Or when you save things out to the cassette port, it's through the 6-bit DAC. The playback from a cassette is the second selection on the mux. Also, the sound line on the cartridge port is the third selection on the mux. So, the cartridges like Orchestra 90 or the Sound Speech Pack or even my Game Master cartridges can use the sound input line there. Again, not really part of the overall discussion here, but just an overview of the hardware. There's a 4th select that you can put on the mux, and then the input line there is just tied to ground, so should just be silent. Who knows what kind of weirdness somebody could come up with that would make use of that in combination with the 1 bit or something like that. But anyway, so there's really only three useful selections on the mux for audio to choose for producing audio out. But the fourth selection will give you a ground. So the 1-bit audio output and the output from the audio mux, or the output side of the mux, are combined together and sent to the audio input on the RF modulator. So effectively you're driving the speaker with a mathematical average of those signals. Now, if you're using an RF modulator, you're not actually driving a speaker directly, you're driving a speaker in the television, so there's some circuitry in between the CoCo and the actual speaker. Although I have seen mods, in fact I probably have some CoCos that are modded with internal speakers, so the point is that whatever signal you're producing, it's going to a speaker. So, there you go. So what exactly is a speaker? Well, I think we all probably have a good idea what that is, but just to formalize it a bit, a speaker is a mechanical transducer, and what that means, so a transducer basically turns one signal into another kind of action or signal. And so in this case, you're taking the electrical signal from the CoCo and producing a physical positioning of the speaker cone. The purpose of the cone is, when you move it, the purpose of the cone is to displace some air. And, that's why bigger speakers make more noise, because they're literally displacing more air. Anyway, if you only, rarely or rather slowly make changes to that signal that's feeding the speaker, at most you'll get is a kind of a click or a thud sound. And even that is probably more from just a mechanical act of, you move the speaker and it kind of stops and vibrates a little bit, or whatever. But anyway, you won't get a lot of sound out of it if you don't change the signal going to the speaker very often. So what you need to do is periodic updates that are within the frequency range of human hearing in order for that output to the speaker to be perceived as sound. Now I just want to note here, ultimately the CoCo produces one audio signal, and that is generally consumed by one speaker, or at least, you might feed it to your stereo, but it all goes out as one. It's the same signal everywhere. So my point is, you're really only getting one channel of sound. I'm trying to create a little bit of a distinction here between channel, and later we're going to talk about voices. And the voice of sound is not exactly the same as a channel of sound. In fact, they're quite different. And again, these are my definitions, so who knows, there's probably some audiophile somewhere that's going to be mad that I butcher all this, but try to keep your reality hat on and deal with me as not an audiophile, but just somebody who kind of knows how this stuff works. So let's talk about tone synthesis. Okay, so how do you go from just being able to wave a speaker in the air to actually being able to produce a tone, a sound, as you will, but a tone is in a fairly pure, fairly mathematical version of sound, a single note or whatever, something like that. So when it comes to tone synthesis, you need to think about waveforms. And again, if you were to take the voltage levels you're sending to the speaker and just put those levels on a graph where y is the voltage level and the x-axis represents time, then you'll get a nice little pretty picture, and it will look a bit like a wave. And so therefore it's called a waveform. And how much it looks like a wave kind of depends on, your own perception of what a wave looks like, but also your ability to accept that not all waves are the same shape. So if you produce that graph of the 1-bit output, the 1-bit output is only really capable of producing what's called a square wave. There's idealized as a square wave. There'd be no intermediate values between the minimum or maximum outputs, so which is effectively off or on, or 0 and +5, I guess. It feeds through some resistors or whatever. I'm not sure it actually gets a +5 all the way out to the RF modulator, but let's just pretend it's +5, or let's just call it on. You get off and on. Now in reality, on their oscilloscope or whatever, that wave's probably not actually going to be square in terms of if you put a protractor on that, so you're not really going to have even a single angle to measure for 90 degrees. You get a little bit of what's called ringing in the corners, where you get some other little distortions, or not quite what you draw on paper. Let's put it that way. But it's close enough for government work. We'll call it a square wave. So the other output is the output from the DAC. Of course, the DAC can take on 64 different values, meaning that it can produce a waveform output that is basically any shape that can be represented by a sequence of those 64 values, which is pretty much anything that you'd actually want to produce. If you get more complicated than that, if you get much more complicated than that, you probably go outside of human perception. There's probably somewhere in between that 64 bit or 6 bits or 64 values is a little bit lacking, but it's really not so bad. Anyway, when you go to synthesize this waveform that you're going to use, you're going to need some way to feed values to the DAC to produce that output, which is supposed to be periodic, or should be periodic, meaning over a sequence of time within a certain frequency, the waveform is going to look the same every so often. I hope you can follow that. So there's a couple of ways that you can generate that output, or that sequence of outputs to the DAC to produce a waveform. One that's commonly used is it's a wavetable, I guess is what you call it. The other option is you can use a fairly simple mathematical formula to generate the sequence of values that you're going to feed to the DAC to produce a wave. And so if you do that, it's fairly easy to do. You can produce a square wave that will look pretty much the same as what you get from the 1-bit output. Or you can produce a triangle wave, which basically just take a sequence of numbers and from a middle number up to the highest level, and then back down through the middle to the lowest level. Or you can produce similarly a sawtooth wave, which would basically count from the lowest value to the highest level and then just loop back to the lowest value. Or you can do that in reverse, so you'd have a reverse sawtooth wave or whatever. The point being, as long as you have a formula that will produce a sequence of values and then sort of repeat itself, you could be using that to produce your waveform for a tone synthesis. But knowing what values to produce in order to get a periodic waveform doesn't really help unless you know when to produce them. So that's the next step, is timing. So you need to do your updates of the waveform at a sort of a regular pace, or else you just have basically noise output or clicks or whatever. It won't feel like a tone. So if you're updating the 1-bit output, you really only need to do that update at twice the rate of the frequency of the tone being synthesized. So if you want to use the 1-bit output to produce a 100 hertz tone, then you need to come back at 200 hertz, and each time you come back you need to flip it. So at 200 hertz you flip from 0 to 1 to 0 to 1. The overall waveform then will be at half that rate, so 100 hertz tone. I don't think that's too complicated. Hopefully you can follow. Now, if you're using a DAC output, you still need to match that your updates need to at least be twice the rate of the frequency tone. But since your waveform will generally take on some number of data points within the wave, generally you're going to need to update at a higher multiple of the frequency rate so that you have enough samples, enough times back at the update to actually step through that table of values. So if you're thinking about the wavetable synthesis there, if your wavetable has 8 values in it, which would be a little ugly, but you could get by with 8 probably, you're going to need to come through it at 8 times the base frequency so that you can hit each one of those 8 points within that wavetable. Now, in some cases, depending on how many places you have in the table and your own preferences and whatever, you can get away too with, if you have a larger wavetable, you can skip some of the points in that so that you don't have to step through the entire wavetable every time you complete one period of the wave. So long as you manage your mathematics correctly, you can sort of skip through it periodically, and it'll be good enough. You'll get some distortion, whatever, but especially if you, depending on what you're feeding, if you're feeding a nice home audio system that might be able to filter out some of the noise or whatever, it'll probably sound fine. Either way, it'll probably sound okay for 80s computer audio. But anyway, the point being that the bigger your wavetable data, or the bigger the more points you're producing in your function that produces the wavetable data, the wave data, the more times you're going to need to come back and update that within the frequency of producing a tone. All that makes it sound like that we would change the update rate based on what tones we're using, which if you're only going to produce one tone, I guess you might do that, but it'd be a little silly. So generally what you do for ease of programming, or just programmer sanity, you would generally pick a fixed update frequency, and then you're going to choose it based on the highest frequency tone that you anticipate needing to generate or synthesize. Because otherwise, while you're updating your song output or whatever, you'd have to also be calculating how often you need to make your next update, and then adjusting the program for that. It just would get really ugly. So typically you'll pick a fixed synthesis frequency, and that's going to be quite a bit higher than any of the tones you want to generate, because it needs to be high enough to also account for your wavetable or whatever, however you're going to step through that. So anyway, typically this timing is going to be based on some sort of hardware timer, which might even be driving an interrupt on a CoCo 1 or 2. For example, you might use the horizontal sync frequency for this. That gets a little ugly because of the fact that it's tied into the full IRQ rather than the fast IRQ signal on the CPU, but it is possible. Simon Jonason kind of covered how you can especially let it run through, especially miss an interrupt while it's processing one interrupt. It sort of misses the next one, and then you come back and reset, and so you lose that amount of time, but it still kind of creates makes it more useful. So you get instead of a 15-ish kilohertz signal, you get sort of a 7.5-ish kilohertz signal that you can use for driving audio output. So basically, the point so far is part of audio synthesis or sound generation is actually synthesizing a given tone. That tone is going to have to drive either the 1-bit output or the DAC. The updates are probably going to have to hit at a fixed frequency, well above the maximum of human hearing, probably at the 8K or faster if you can get it. Now, you don't have to use an interrupt. If you can dedicate all your time to audio generation, then you can use, say, a controlled cycle counted loop for your timing or whatever. But it does need to be fairly precise. It's a little bit forgiving for your hearing. Will forgive a little bit of off in timing, but it still needs to hit pretty close. All right, so you've got one set of timing that you're doing for frequency for your synthesis. You're synthesizing a single tone right here. But you also, if you're playing a musical score or whatever, you need to change those tones according to whatever tune or melody you're playing. I refer to this as sequencing. Sequencing is a totally different task from tone generation. You're going to need to interpret a musical score, the data representing a musical score, for any given, say it's a single voice or single channel of operation here, a single instrument playing. You're basically going to have a sequence of data that represents a frequency and a duration for each note. And so for frequency we're worried about for synthesis, but the duration of the note is what we worry about for sequencing. So the sequencer will wait for the current note's duration to expire, and then it'll set up the tone generator for the frequency of the new note. But it might do more than just the frequency. It might actually select a different waveform or whatever, depending on how complicated your musical score is. But again, this is all for a single voice, a single instrument, a single channel, whatever. Okay, your sequencing typically happens at what I would call a human level. So it's much slower than what you need for generating a frequency output for tone. Much slower. You're talking about large fractions of seconds. So you think about, typical march is 120 beats per minute. So that's half a second for a quarter note. So an eighth note is a quarter of a second, and a 16th note is an eighth of a second. You're talking about pretty big fractions of seconds, a human perceivable time. I feel obviously it needs to be human perceivable time. The whole point of playing the music is to entertain humans, right? Okay, well that said, you typically only have so many hardware timing resources available. And so what is almost universal for most video games and a lot of other stuff that needs to do sequencing is to use, on a home computer or whatever, is to use a VSync signal, possibly as an interrupt or possibly just as by polling the signal, because it is relatively slow. You're talking about 1/60th of a second-ish for NTSC displays, 1/50th of a second for PAL or CCAM displays. Closer to human scale, so that's still a little too fast for humans, but it's you work with what you got. But so typically the sequencer will fire at that 1/60th of a second interval. He'll figure out whether the current node needs to change, if it does, how it needs to change, and he'll set up the synthesizer for the new note. Typically, you just tell it a new frequency, or possibly tell it a new frequency and a new waveform, that sort of thing. Okay, but now that's still, if we're talking about one sequencer, one synthesizer, one speaker, so that's one single channel of audio, or one single voice of audio. But now we're going to talk about where they start to diverge between a channel and a voice. If you did have multiple channels that were playing, say if you had an audio card that was playing music on its own while you were synthesizing music with the say the 1-bit audio or something like that, or if you just say a totally different piece of hardware, whatever. If there are multiple channels, you take those voltages that are intended for the speaker and you combine them, and essentially you'd average them before going to the speaker. So that's what you're doing, like when you have the big sliding switches or slides on the mixer tables that you see the DJs use or whatever. Is you're setting, you're weighting the inputs, but they're basically being averaged before going to the actual output for whatever channel you're mixing there. So imagine that's a hardware solution that we don't really have available, but on the CoCo at least. But if we want to do something similar, imagine if the sequencer I was just talking about, instead of talking to a single synthesizer while it's following the musical score at 1/60th of a second or whatever, imagine if it talked to multiple synthesizer instances. And it's this software. Multiple instances basically means multiple chunks of data passed back through similar software or whatever. So if you had multiple synthesizer instances running, then each synthesizer instance will generate its own DAC value to contribute to the actual tonal output. And so imagine if you had those separate instances and you combine them all with one more final stage that takes the DAC values from each of these synthesizer instances and then combines or averages those values to a final hardware DAC value. Then that is what gets fed to the hardware, the speaker, at that synthesis rate that I mentioned earlier, that you pick one and stick to it so that you can drive it with hardware or whatever. Then these multiple synthesizers all but feeding into that single hardware channel. Well, that's where you get multiple voices. So you still only have a single channel, but you have multiple voices. And so it's kind of like, instead of having everybody on stage with their own microphone, you have with the two or three singers crowd in around the lead guitarist, and they all sing into the same microphone. So that's how you get the multiple voices. You just create these virtual singers, and you combine them all at the microphone input rather than having separate microphones going to the output. I hope I didn't confuse anybody too much with that analogy, but yeah, so basically that's all you're really doing. Instead of having your synthesizer, having your sequencer drive one synthesizer and your one synthesizer generate a single output that goes straight to the DAC, you have your sequencer drive multiple synthesizers. Each synthesizer kind of independently creates a DAC value that it would put out on its own if it were by itself. And then the final stage that takes all of those and combines the DAC outputs from each synthesizer into one actual physical output that goes to the actual speaker output. So then, like I said, each synthesizer is a voice, and so that's your multiple voices going to your physical output. Hopefully that answers the question of how does this stuff work. Hopefully I didn't create more questions than than I anticipated. Before I go, I would like to point something out that I think is kind of cool, and kind of in a why did Tandy do that kind of way. So the 6-bit value that you write to the DAC. So of course it's you write to a PIA register to get that, and the PIA registers are actually 8 bits wide. So 6 of those bits are fed to the PIA register. 6 of the bits go back out to the actual DAC. But of note is the 6 bits in question are the higher order bits. The bits that represent would normally represent some values of 128 and 64 and 32, whatever. Not the bits that represent the values of 0, 1, 2, 3. So why is that? That seems a little strange, doesn't it? Well, so conduct this little thought experiment with me. So if you have a binary addition, so I hope you're somewhat familiar with binary numbers. I'm not really going to cover them too much here, but hopefully you know that just like, imagine a 6-digit decimal number. You add them together, at most you could get would be a 7-digit decimal number, right? And so when you have a 6-bit binary number, and you add 2 of those together, then at most you'll get is a 7-bit binary number. So imagine if you started with 4 6-bit values, you add 2 of them together, and the other 2 together, so you end up with 2 potentially 7-bit values, and then you add those 2 intermediate results to each other, and you end up with 1 8-bit value, right? So now you've got an 8-bit value. To average those out, you started with 4. So to average out that value, you'd want to divide by 4, which in binary would typically be done just by a shift to the right of 2 bits. So you add them all together and then shift to the right by 2 bits. That averages out the values. But then if you want to write to the DAC, you're going to go and shift to the left by 2 bits. Well, it turns out those last 2 steps cancel each other out. So just by doing you're adding 4 DAC values together, you're immediately ready to write the physical DAC value of the average. It's already done for you. You just write it straight out to the PIA register. So basically, they facilitated 4-voice synthesized audio by the way they positioned where the DAC value goes in the PIA output register. So how cool is that? I think that's pretty cool. Just in conclusion, let's summarize a bit. So the CoCo audio hardware is very flexible, mostly because of the use of the DAC. Could be nicer in some ways if we had some sort of DMA or whatever to feed the DAC, but we don't. So the CPU has to do it. So that's sort of part of the expense We don't have any audio hardware to generate tones or whatever. You can, on the other hand, you can generate pretty much whatever you want, different waveforms, as flexible as you want it to be, as long as all you're doing is audio, because it all comes at the expense of the CPU. Now, because you are working with the CPU, you can make some algorithmic trade-offs there. So, for example, I'm not 100% sure if it's always going to be easier to read your next waveform value from a table, or just generate it from a sawtooth or other math formula. But it's probably easier to just generate it, like say, from the sawtooth, but it might not sound the way you want it to sound. So the point being, this flexibility, you do get to make some choices and have some trade-offs there on what to do, what's easier, whatever. You know, it is what it is. Creativity has to reach within the bounds of the hardware. So, yeah, you can do lots of cool stuff. You have to pay for it with some CPU. You might be able to reduce how much you pay for it with CPU by doing some trade-offs in the algorithm, whatever. I don't know. That's pretty much everything in the CoCo is the same way. You know, the CPU is a great CPU to have, and it's a good thing we got a great CPU because the CPU has to do everything. So, anyway, so there you go. And like I said, just wanted a little bit about the positioning of the 6 bits for the DAC within the 8 bits of the PIA register. I think that's pretty cool. I don't know if I can credit Tandy with that, or if that goes back to the Motorola reference design. Whoever, somebody was pretty clever with that. So, you know, at least there we have why did Tandy do that? That isn't something stupid. It's something that's actually kind of cool. Now, it might be that Tandy did that just because Motorola said so. Whatever. Thank God for the Texans out there in Motorola. Anyway, pretty cool. Well, I think I've probably rambled on long enough. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. And, you know, CoCo forever.
What if you could go back in time to just the right moment and ensure that Tandy won?
You definitely earned this office.
Thank you. Yes, you're too kind.
Oh, I'm much happier breaking stuff. Life has been a dream.
But what if you went back to the wrong moment?
Give me that. How do you even know what that was?
Listen, I don't really care about these blueprints. I just want...
Say, who are you? You want to spy for Commodore or something, are you?
Just move! Oh. Hey, hold the elevator! Hold the
Stop right there!
Whoa, no need for guns, no need for guns!
So, Mr. Anders, it seems you have stumbled upon my little secret. There is no point in waiting for security. I think you are about to have an accident.
Okay, no!
CoCo forever? Spring-ish 2018.
Welcome back, all you CoCo cruisers, to Neil's Corner on episode 36 of the CoCo Crew podcast. As we are on our way into the CoCo New Year and unwinding from CoCo Fest, I thought I'd do a review on a CoCo 3 game cartridge I've been using to test, well, CoCo 3s with. The game is called Amazing World of Malcolm Mortar. The cartridge has been sitting on my bench for a while now, and I figured maybe I should actually give this game a chance and learn how to play it. Back in the day I owned this game, but for some reason I never really got into it. So, better late than never. Let's do this. Here's a rundown. Amazing World of Malcolm Mortar was published by Tandy and sold at Radio Shacks across the nation. The media type it comes on is a ROM game cartridge. It requires a Tandy Color Computer 3 with 128K of memory.
It was programmed by Greg Zumwalt, who also brought us a few other awesome games. The game supports keyboard or joystick and also will take advantage of the enhanced 2-button joystick. Amazing World of Malcolm Mortar is an original arcade-style game and not a clone or a port of something else. At least I've never seen anything like it. Your character is named B. Rick, a play on the word brick, and you go around the mazes trying to trap the bad guys named Fuzzies by making a brick wall and trapping them into a corner they can't escape from. Once you've trapped all the Fuzzies on each level, a yellow path will light up, leading your way to the exit. You collect gold, dynamite, and bricks along your journey. When you make a wall to trap the bad guys, you can make a temporary wall or a permanent wall. Some of the bad guys can break the temporary walls, so it's best to make a permanent one. However, be careful, because if you make a permanent wall and block the path to your exit, you instantly die. There are tons of mazes and levels. I'm not sure how many there are in total. I've been able to get through a few levels, but they get more complicated as you progress through them. This is actually a very fun, addictive game, and features some beautiful scrolling graphic levels. Each level is several screens wide and high, and you can scroll 4-way wandering through them. I also don't mind the sound in this game either. It doesn't get annoying. I highly recommend checking this game out. You can download the patched disc copy of it from the Color Computer Archives, or you can track down the original ROM cartridge. Also, if you'd like to see this game in action, be sure to watch Stevie Stroh, the original gamer, his YouTube video he made for it. A full 18-minute playthrough. Well, there you have it. Another game you can play on your CoCo 3. And if you don't have a CoCo 3, I definitely suggest getting one. And then you can say, hey, have you got your CoCo 3 yet? Until next month, happy CoCo gaming.
Okay, but why Tandy Computers? In a word, quality. We do it all, from custom-designed semiconductors to the finished product. Tandy Business Computers are manufactured in our own USA plants. We test and retest and test again to ensure one of the highest standards of quality in the industry. And Radio Shack provides total service and support. I'm convinced.
Tandy Computers at Radio Shack Computer Centers. In business, for business.
Well, it's that time again. We have reached the end of episode 36. As usual, I'd like to thank our host, John Linville, for procuring all those news items and providing us another fantastic tech segment. Also like to thank Mike Rohn for making all those cool commercials and editing the podcast. A big, big, big thanks goes out to Simon Jonason for giving us some of your time to record an interview with you. I'm blown away with your work gathering a CoCo demo scene. This is something that CoCo has never had. Well, at least a small group of people working together making a demo. Last but not least, I'd like to thank all of you who listen and support the CoCo Crew podcast each month. As I mentioned earlier, without you listening, it'd be pretty silly creating this podcast. Until next month, happy CoCoing and retro forever.
It's a blast from the past.
Please listen carefully.
CoCo.
CoCo. CoCo. CoCo.
Dance like there's no tomorrow.
What is this crazy rock and roll music anyway? It's a blast from the past.
Dance, dance, dance.